Welcome back to Utility Sports. Really excited for today's NBA mock draft, where we continue to look deeper and deeper into the 2023 NBA draft class with our version 2.0 NBA mock draft out on the channel. Again, not on a Monday, but here we are nonetheless. Really excited for it. Smash that like button and subscribe to the channel for more content, especially if you're new here. It would mean a lot. It lets me know I'm doing a good job in these videos and that you appreciate all the hard work that goes into these style of videos. Of course, prepping myself to talk about the prospects for an hour at length, and then also just the time behind the scenes and making the graphics, all that kind of stuff. I enjoy it so much, so I hope you guys do as well. And let's get into it. First overall, the San Antonio Spurs with Victor Wembanyama, and I don't want to just fly over this selection. This is the obvious, no doubt, no-brainer selection. And to be honest, if you hear someone saying that Victor Wembanyama shouldn't be the first overall pick, you got to stop listening to them for basketball advice, basketball takes. Because yes, theoretically, could Victor Wembanyama have career-ending injuries and fall apart as a player and maybe never live up to some of that generational hype that he's received? Yes, that's a possibility, but it doesn't mean you pass on him first overall just because it's a risk. Any player at any time could sustain some potential injury. And when we're looking at them when they're healthy, Victor Wembanyama is undoubtedly not only the best player in this draft, but the best player to come out since Luka Doncic, no question, and probably prior to Luka Doncic since LeBron James. He is an unbelievable prospect at 7'4", some would even say 7'5". There's some conflicting reports on his actual height, but I know it's huge if you look at the pictures and videos of him next to Rudy Gobert, someone he has a really good relationship with. That French national team, by the way, is going to get pretty scary, especially with the potential inclusion of Joel Embiid. They've got some other French prospects, too, that are coming into this year's draft. That French team is going to be really, really nice. And so is the San Antonio Spurs, because Victor's length, his size, I think is going to be really overwhelming. He's a really good offensive prospect. I think he's got the skill set that you're looking to build around as a perimeter player who can put the ball in the deck. I think he's going to be even more successful in the NBA than he is currently in his French league. And the reason why is the court's a little bit bigger. There's going to be more shooting around him, a little bit more spacing. And the way that the game is called, the physicality is a little bit different. It's going to benefit him quite a bit playing in the NBA as compared to his French league. And I also think that his defense is really going to outweigh his offense, even despite being a good offensive prospect, someone who I think is capable of averaging over 23, 24, 25 points a game his rookie season. And that's not even going to be the part that we talk about the most. I fully expect Victor Wembanyama to be an all-star his rookie season. Now, is it going to be in the form of an injury replacement? Possibly. There might be some questions about if people are going to actually vote him into the All-Star game because he is in fact a rookie. Some of the teams that he would potentially face might not even see him in person, especially think about some of the East Coast teams. Perhaps San Antonio might not play some of these teams until post All-Star break, kind of like what happened with the Dallas Mavericks and Charlotte Hornets this past year. So because of that, maybe there was a little bit of limitation in terms of which teams, which players, which coaches actually see him in person, which fans actually see him play not only in person, but maybe even on their own TV. Victor is going to be incredible, though. He's an all-star level player in my eyes, and he's going to be somebody that is going to completely shape the future of the NBA. I said it multiple times that the draft lottery night was going to be the most important night in the NBA since Game 7 of the 2016 NBA Finals, and I believe it played out very, very well for San Antonio. Spurs fans, you got to be super excited. There ain't no reason to not hit that like button because I manifested all the positive vibes. And I also want to point out, Spurs fans, there's an offseason preview 2.0 coming out on the channel talking about Victor Wembanyama and what the Spurs should maybe look to do next when it comes to roster building. That's coming out today on the channel as well. So hopefully you guys check that video out after this mock draft. Pick number 2, the Charlotte Hornets here now. And this is really where the draft starts because there's a lot of questions looming around the Charlotte Hornets. And a lot of people believe that maybe, just maybe, the Charlotte Hornets should consider not going with Scoot Henderson and maybe going with Brandon Miller second overall. And I really just do not like that idea. I think that they should go, in fact, with Scoot Henderson. That is the way that they should operate. And some people are going to have questions as to why. I think it's pretty clear as to why they should go with Scoot Henderson. Here are some notable times in NBA history that a team drafted off of fit or positional need second overall. 1984, Sam Bowie over Michael Jordan. 2003, Darko Milicic over one of Carmelo Anthony, Dwayne Wade, or Chris Bosh. 2012, Michael Kidd-Gilchrist over Bradley Beal. That was the Charlotte Bobcats. Charlotte fans, you probably know that well. 2018, Marvin Bagley over Luka Doncic. And 2020, James Wiseman over LaMelo Ball. Hornets fans, You are the team sitting here with LaMelo Ball, worried about the fit with him, and the only reason you have him is because originally the Warriors weren't sure about the fit with LaMelo Ball in Golden State. Who do you think Golden State would prefer to have right now? The better player. Take the better player, take the better prospect. Scoot Henderson, we've known for over a year that he should be the second overall pick in this year's draft. Just because the ping pong balls fell a certain way and you're now picking second and you're not exactly sure if he fits perfectly with LaMelo Ball, I don't pull the trigger. Pull the trigger on it. LaMelo Ball has yet to play in a playoff game. Okay, you can't just say, oh, well, what's the fit? If you want to worry about fit, you should probably be a playoff team first. Okay, there's just not really a rationale here as to why you should take Brandon Miller over Scoot Henderson, when in my opinion, Scoot Henderson is just clearly the better prospect. He's going to get to the rim more. He's going to facilitate for others at a higher level. You could argue that his perimeter shot making, as long as it continues to improve and we see it take steps forward, that he's not going to be as good as Brandon Miller in that regard, but he's more dangerous with the other aspects of his game, that as long as that perimeter shooting continues to develop, he's going to be a potential superstar or at least all-star level player. And I think his ceiling is significantly higher than Brandon Miller's. And I think Charlotte, just you need to draft him. You just need to draft Scoot Henderson second overall. That was my little mini rant. Moving on to pick 3, we have the Portland Trailblazers at this spot, and there's a lot of question marks around the Portland Trailblazers as well. So there's a little bit I want to say here about the Portland Trailblazers too, and it actually comes from a viewer who commented, so shout out to you, Kirk. He said, people act like Dame has leverage, draft pick, and just like Kevin Durant, if it gets bad, trade him for the best deal at the trade deadline. And this is a great point. Damian Lillard's under contract. I know Damian Lillard might say, I want out if you're trying to surround me with another 19-year-old, 20-year-old. I want to try and win. He really doesn't actually have leverage to force his way out of the organization at this current point. Joe Cronin, Mike Schmidt's 2 of the lead decision makers there for Portland on draft night. They're the ones who have long-term extensions with the organization. They know they're going to get paid. They know that they have job security as of right now. And because of that, they can do what they deem to be best for the organization. There's been a lot of questions about if they should trade the pick or if they should actually go out and trade Damian Lillard. And the answer for right now might be neither. They might just keep the pick and keep Dame. And then if Dame decides that he doesn't want to be in Portland, you can trade him later in the season or potentially going into next offseason as well if he just makes it clear he doesn't want to be in Portland. But then that way you're not really responsible for setting this team up for failure. Brandon Miller's a really good pick. He's a really nice player who fits next to Damian Lillard very well, in my opinion, too. Now, is he ready to win right away and step into the NBA as a top-end player who's going to impact playoff series in year 1 of his career? Probably not. That's just very rare to see from a rookie. You're just not going to rely on that. So does this solve Dame's issue? Definitely not. Now, if Brandon Miller was drafted 5 years ago, it probably would solve some of Dame's issues, because long-term, he might just end up being a very, very good player who's capable of scoring 18 to 20 points a night in the NBA and being a really productive wing who can knock down perimeter shots. He's growing as a slasher and a facilitator. I don't think he's there fully yet. I think he's going to struggle a little bit year 1 in both of those categories. But nonetheless, he's a perimeter shot maker, and that's one of the most important elements to today's game. And I think if you're looking at Portland, wing play's always been kind of an issue for them. You think back to some of their better years when it came to wing production, and you think about a combination of Al-Farouq Aminu and Mo Harkless. Is my point clear? Like, build this thing long term. See if you can help Dame compete right now. Probably keep Jeremy Grant, I'm guessing. And you can just go from there. And Portland has an intriguing team and a young team that you can at least say, hey, we still trust the future while still trying to win with Dame. And it might be tough to do that, but I just don't think you mortgage the future right now when you've been the 13th seed in the Western Conference. Pick 4, the Houston Rockets at this spot. And there's a lot of question marks about what Houston could potentially do with this pick as well. Could they unload it in a trade for a star player, someone like a Karl Anthony Towns or a Jalen Brown? There's also some discussions about potential other fits. Then, of course, the James Harden rumors. Will he go to the Houston Rockets? My expectation is yes, but it doesn't really change who I suggest them to pick at this spot, because I think that they go best player available here, and that is Amen Thompson. And let's say James Harden doesn't come to H-Town, then this is a no-brainer. But even with Harden coming, I still think Amen Thompson, this isn't a terrible selection, even if you sign James Harden to a 4-year deal. And I know some people are going to be surprised by that, confused by that. Amen Thompson is a very different player from James Harden with some similar strengths. Both of them pretty solid playmakers. Right now, Amen Thompson's a little bit more wild, very turnover prone. But Amen Thompson's game is more built off of athleticism and vertical burst and lateral change of direction, which Harden was good at a lot of those things, especially in his prime, specifically that change of direction. And I think that Harden, even though he's probably not the most, true mentor, he's not going to sit there and probably watch hours and hours of film with Amen Thompson. But I just do think having a presence like him around Amen Thompson would be good for him in learning and seeing some of the things that Harden does to find success. I think Amen could learn that way from him, even if it's not Harden expressly talking him through exactly what he's doing. And I think also Amen, one thing about him is he's 20 years old, but he's still relatively raw, even though he's not, some fresh 19-year-old coming into the draft. He's a little bit older at 20, but he still needs some maturing time. He needs time to not necessarily play in the G League, but probably come off the bench. I just don't think day one he's a true starter in this league. Now, I think he's going to grow into a very good player and somebody that I would definitely look at taking 4th overall if I was Houston. And as he starts to kind of progress into what his prime could potentially be 4 or 5 years from now, that's when James Harden's contract would likely be expiring in Houston anyway, which is why I think Amen Thompson, with his athleticism, maybe you play him on the wing a little bit. There's some options here, right? You can play Amen Thompson with his athletic profile in a variety of places. He's going to be able to defend across multiple positions. I don't think it interferes as much as people would assume. Now, maybe it limits what Amen Thompson's role will be early in his career, but I think that also gives him time to adjust to the NBA, develop his skill set, and then also puts Houston in a spot where they're still developing young talent, but also just a much better team than they have been since trading James Harden back in 2021. Pick number 5, the Detroit Pistons. Now at this spot, the Pistons, it's been a tough week here, I would say, since moving down from the number 1 odds in the draft down all the way to pick number 5, which again was the worst case scenario. But I do have them going with Cam Whitmore at this spot. I actually ran a poll on the channel, and it kind of looked at how Pistons fans and just NBA fans in general were kind of viewing what Detroit would potentially do 5th overall. And I think Cam Whitmore was the player that you guys all voted as the possible pick. There was a majority rule on Cam Whitmore. In a lot of my mocks, I've been considering Jarace Walker 5th overall, but I do think with what Detroit currently possesses with Isaiah Stewart, Jalen Duren, maybe they do look more for a true wing, and Cam Whitmore is that. And I think you have to go back further than the Villanova tape on him to really believe that he's a great prospect, because his Villanova season, the lone season he had for Villanova, was kind of up and down. There were some really bright moments where he's putting guys on posters and getting to the rim and accelerating and bursting out of his triple threat faster than I've ever seen any prospect ever, essentially. He's been incredible, but in moments and in bursts. And at times he was not good in bursts. I think that his on-ball decision-making is questionable. I think that he has to work on his handle. There's a lot of concerns. But in Detroit, maybe you can mask some of those because you do have Jaden Ivey. You do have Cade Cunningham. 2 players who are going to have the ball in their hands maybe a little bit more than Cam Whitmore. And maybe you can take advantage of some of those athletic strengths that he has. And then if you also flash back to his Team USA film, that's really where you're going to be impressed because he was fantastic. Obviously, the game turned a lot to transition, and that's where he excelled. I think it gives Detroit a fun combination between him and Ivey that can get out and run, give you some easy baskets, which I think this team needs. And the hope is that long term, he's got the frame and the physicality to be a really good defender. He measured in at 6'5" and 3/4 with shoes off. And because of that, I think that, he's going to play around 6'7". I think people were hoping maybe he'd be a little bit taller than that. It's not the way he measured. But nonetheless, Detroit here, 5th overall, they still get a player who a year ago, a lot of people saw as a top 5 pick and ends up becoming a reality here, at least in this mock draft. Pick 6, the Orlando Magic. They have 2 selections in this lottery, of course, with the other one coming from the Chicago Bulls. And 6th overall, I actually have them going with Taylor Hendricks. I took a long time sitting here and thinking back and forth between Taylor Hendricks, Jarace Walker. Usually when I do my mock drafts, I don't just throw them all together in one sitting either. I kind of sit and think, and I plan some stuff out. Usually the top 3 or 4 has been kind of easy for me this year. But 6 was kind of a real sticking point for me because we got to Jarace Walker, Taylor Hendricks. There were some other options I considered too, but really those were the 2 players that I had at the forefront of my mind. And I landed on Taylor Hendricks for a couple of reasons. First of all, he's a little bit more local, makes it more likely that Orlando has had eyes on him throughout the entire duration of the year. Obviously, UCF, fairly closely located. to the Orlando Magic, especially in comparison to, say, Houston, where Jarace Walker plays. And I think for what Orlando currently has, I felt like Jarace Walker maybe interferes a little bit more skill set wise with Paolo Banchero, whereas Taylor Hendricks maybe not quite as high of a ceiling, maybe a little bit less ball skills, maybe a little bit less, actual handling and shot making, but he's just flat out a better perimeter 3-point shooter, and I think he's a better defender. And because of that, I think his fit with Orlando is very sensible. He's also taller than Jarace Walker. He's not quite as strong as Walker, of course, so defensively there is some limitations in terms of the physicality, but Jarace Walker, there's an argument that he was the best college rim protector this year. There's a few other guys in this draft that would like to have an argument with me. A guy like Dereck Lively as well would like to make a case for that, but Orlando 6th overall. I think finding a small ball center or a guy who can maybe play the 4 and you maybe shift Paulo down to the 3, which is a big mismatch advantage for you, in my opinion, physically. And then Franz Wagner playing the 2 height-wise gives you another big advantage. I think that it's a really fun way to look at their team and say, hey, this team could play a lot of tall ball with Wendell Carter at the 5. It'd give them another lengthy shot blocker, which I think the more of the better. Wendell Carter doesn't really block a ton of shots now, and I think he's a pretty solid rim protector. He just does a lot of that by challenging instead of actually leaving his feet and jumping. Taylor Hendricks would leave his feet and jump, and he often wins those battles. So I think Orlando gets an intriguing player who fits some of the areas that I think that they need to continue to improve on. And shooting was one of them. He shot over 39% from 3 this past year in college. I think maybe a little bit of an adjustment period to the NBA. I'm not sure if he's a true 39% shooter at this point. I think he's probably going to shoot 36% or so from the 3-point line in the NBA. Just obviously it's a bigger arc, longer 3-point shots, but also, with the length of a college season, that those numbers can vary up and down a little bit. So I think Taylor Hendricks, maybe the shooting's not as great as it's stated right now, but obviously having that in your actual box score that you can hand to people and say, hey, check the stats, it definitely helps his stock. And for me, a player who I have 5th on my big board currently, he goes 6th overall to the Orlando Magic. Pick 7, the Indiana Pacers, and they're at this spot, and they are smiling big time because a player that I think not only would the Pacers front office and organization be really happy to see here, Rick Carlisle would be really happy to see him, but I know Pacers fans are too, and that is Jarace Walker out of Houston. Very rarely has he fallen down to 7 on my mock drafts, but I do think with Detroit potentially considering more of a true wing, whether that is Ausar Thompson or Cam Whitmore, I think that could shift the paradigm here a little bit, where it puts Orlando in that weird pickle of, hey, do we go with a guy like potentially Taylor Hendricks or Jarace Walker? And because of that, it shifted Jarace Walker down to 7. The Pacers have him here, and this is like a home run fit for them. For a lot of the reasons why Orlando didn't take Jarace Walker, those are the exact reasons Indiana does, because he's got a very strong skill set. He's a very strong player with a really nice physical body. I think he gives them some toughness that I think they need in the forward spot. And if there's one thing Pacers fans really want this offseason, it is the addition of good forwards onto the roster, and they're getting a great one here in Jarace Walker. I've compared him in previous mock drafts to a guy like maybe DeAndre Hunter, although I think in that same draft class, Jarace Walker would go before DeAndre Hunter because he's flashed more ball skills. He's somebody who can make some tough jump shots, make some tough fall away shots as well. I think his handle is improving. I think his passing vision's decent as well. He's got a lot of intriguing aspects, and I think realistically, if you look at players who outside of the top 4 in this class, you could make an argument that Jarace Walker maybe has some of the best superstar potential out of players after pick number 4. Now, I'm not guaranteeing anything here, but I'm saying if everything fell together right, he can pass a little, he can handle it a little, he can shoot it a bit. There's question marks about the deep range shot making, but defensively, I think he's pretty special. He's versatile. He's going to be able to defend likely 2 through 4, and he's got the physical frame to maybe even battle with some 5s from time to time. I think Indiana gets a really fun player here that maybe lets Miles Turner roam around a little bit more and gives them some different lineup flexibility too that I would really like to see them play with. The one concern I have is he didn't measure in super great at 6'6.5" without shoes on. I think a lot of people were hoping to see him more around that 6'7.5", 6'8" number without shoes, and because of that, he's just a little bit smaller, a little bit of concern there, just because he's not quite as big as I think a lot of people expected him to be. But again, with shoes on, he'll be right around that 6'7.5" mark or so. It's not like he's tiny. He's a big, strong player. It's just, I think people were hoping for a little bit bigger, which is what separated Taylor Hendricks for me from him in this mock draft for Orlando, which ultimately led to Walker falling to the Pacers here in this one. Number 8, the Washington Wizards on the board. And I think a lot of people would expect me to say a certain prospect here, but we actually have a little shift in this mock draft because I did want to talk about a specific situation that I could see potentially coming to fruition. And that's Washington being under a really big time state of crisis right now, where not only is Kyle Kuzma headed toward free agency, but Kristaps Porzingis is as well. And you might say, well, what's the real issue? They maybe could keep both of those guys. And I do think that's a realistic possibility. It's really hard to mock for Washington right now because we don't know who their president of basketball operations is. We don't know who their long-term decision maker is going to be. And because of that, I think Washington's really tricky. They could look at Ausar Thompson here instead of Anthony Black. Anthony Black is the obvious fit onto the way that the team is currently constituted, the way that the team is currently built. Anthony Black is a lot of the things that they are missing from the current roster. But who knows? Maybe Washington can swing a sign and trade around Kuzma and maybe a sign and trade around Porzingis. Maybe they just let both of them walk for nothing, which is interesting decision making. But at the same time, do you want to lock yourself into a team that just earned the 8th overall pick? Do you really want to lock into that long term? The answer to that might be no. And because of that, maybe they just go high upside here. And Ausar does have higher upside than Anthony Black because he's a better athlete. Probably could be a top point of attack defender in the league, one of the best in regards in terms of the physical skill set that he possesses, the physical tools that could make up an elite on-ball defender. He's extremely quick. He's got really good makeup speed as well. He jumps out of the gym. He's a phenomenal leaper and somebody who is going to have some highlight plays that you're not going to believe. Does that mean he's a great player right now? No, I think there's a ways for him to go in terms of development. His shot making is rather sporadic right now, just like we talked about with Amen Thompson. He's a little bit further along, but I wouldn't say much further along. And I think that his playmaking is, I would say, significantly further behind Amen Thompson's in terms of his actual ability to like pick apart a defense and put the ball on time on target at the right spot. One thing he does very well is he's a good breakout passer. So Washington drafting him, he's a really great transition player right now. I think on both ends of the floor, he's going to block shots in transition as a defender. And I also think he's going to get out and run. He's going to finish a lot of plays in transition. And he can also start transition plays for you by rebounding it and then throwing hit ahead passes. He's really good in those regards. Washington, the reason that they would take him here is because they feel like either one, they might lose Kuzma or Porzingis to a team with cap space, or that they're just making that actual decision of, we don't know if we want to lock into this team. With the new CBA, it's going to be tough to maybe operate out of that. And because of that, they just need to go upside now and try and build around a different style of team. And maybe Ausar Thompson could be the beginning of that bridge to a different destination for Washington. Number 9, the Utah Jazz now at this spot, and Danny Ainge is a really, really smart drafter. He's had his fair share of misses, but he's also had a plethora of hits in the draft. And this would be another one, Anthony Black. I really feel like there's 9 guys in this year's draft that in most drafts would really garner a lot of top 5 consideration. All of the players off the board up to this point, including Anthony Black for me, in a lot of drafts, I do believe would be top 5 picks. I talked about with Jarace Walker, how he would likely be drafted above DeAndre Hunter, who went 4th overall in his own draft. There, you can make the case for a lot of these guys that they'd be maybe the 5th overall pick, 4th overall pick in a lot of drafts. Anthony Black, fantastic player, 6'7" point guard who is very cerebral, understands how to run an offense. He plays with patience. He's able to set things up. He's got good control of the basketball. And then defensively, probably one of the better defensive playmakers in this draft. I don't think he's received enough love for what he does as kind of a little help defender. When he's on the same side as the driver, he does a nice job cutting off some of those driving lanes while also keeping his arms out and deterring passes to the guy he's helping off of. That's a really underrated element to his game. You go back to some of his high school tape as well, and he dwarfed kids in high school. Of course, that's kind of what you expect from a guy who's going top 10 in the draft. But it was just a lot of fun to watch his high school film back when I was watching him years before this year's draft. And I think Anthony Black, just his development at Arkansas, we saw him kind of grow into more of a point of attack defender. We saw him do that a decent amount for Arkansas. I think him and Jordan Walsh both offer some really interesting elements when it comes to point of attack defense at the NBA level. But nonetheless, Anthony Black's going to be a good team defender. Could potentially grow into a very good on-ball defender, and then he can run the show for you. Plus, he tested pretty well physically. Really nice vertical jump, and I think his shooting's progressing. So a lot of the concerns, Utah could definitely sell themselves on this. Some people are going to say, well, look, there might be wings that Utah would like to add next to Lauri. I get that. This is a 6'7" guard. He's basically wing sized. Okay. You pull the trigger on him. I think he's got everything you're looking for. Pick 10, the Dallas Mavericks now at this spot. Of course, one of the big storylines from the NBA draft lottery was, first of all, would the Mavericks keep their pick or not? But then secondly, I do think that there was some interest in Victor Wembanyama and his camp to potentially play for the Dallas Mavericks and potentially be teammates with Luka Doncic. I do think that there was some interest there from Victor. Was reported by ESPN as well. But nonetheless, didn't happen. The Spurs definitely going to draft Victor Wembanyama, and he's happy to be a Spur. I think that was his preferred landing spot. I do just want to mention that Dallas was a place he would have liked to play as well, I think. But here, the Mavericks, instead of trading the pick in this mock draft, I thought about who would they likely draft if they were to keep this pick. And I landed on Gradey Dick as the option, and there's a few reasons behind it. One thing as a Mavericks fan myself that I've been kind of sick of is watching this team rely on not so great shooters to shoot open shots. And what I mean by that is Tim Hardaway Jr. is a solid shooter, and I think that Maxi Kleber's a solid shooter, and I think for the most part they've got a bunch of guys who shoot the ball fairly solidly. My expectation is Kyrie Irving will be back. He is a great shooter. Luka Doncic is a great shooter, obviously creates a lot of the shots for himself, really doesn't shoot very many catch and shoot threes. Gradey Dick is a great shooter, and if you put him in a role where he's going to catch a lot of open looks and knock them down pretty consistently, this really enhances Dallas's offense. And you might think, oh, well, Dallas, typically you're thinking defense, you probably don't want to touch the offense. The offense has not really been that good. Part of that is they play a pretty slow pace, so their points per possession just naturally goes down because defenses are mostly set against them. But then secondly, you're also looking at a team that just scores less points per game because they play a slower style of play. And all of that tends to rear its ugly head a little bit throughout the regular season because you're just struggling to score, struggling to keep up with the other team when you can't defend. So let's try and score more points. And you might say, well, don't you want to improve the defense? The Denver Nuggets just had the most prolific offense in playoff history, basically, and they're now in the finals. Scoring is still a good way to win games, and it's still a good way to build a team. I really do believe that, and I think Gradey Dick does help space the floor here around Kyrie Irving and Luka Doncic. It gives them an elite shooter, something that they just really have not had since Seth Curry was in Dallas, and then they traded him for Josh Richardson to go down this pathway of, hey, we don't need elite shooters, we just need guys who can hit open shots because Luka generates them. Having elite shooters shooting open shots should be the priority for Dallas, and I think Gradey Dick really is going to at least fulfill that role. It doesn't solve all of Dallas's issues. I just feel like in this draft, there's not a guy who 10th overall I feel like I love. I think Gradey Dick's one of the better options for them here, which is why I landed on him at this selection. Then we go into the Orlando Magic at pick number 11. Remember, 6th overall, we went with Taylor Hendricks. And now with Gradey Dick off the floor, or off the board, excuse me, it's kind of difficult for me to see them going with a pure shooter. Some people might float the name Jordan Hawkins here. I just don't really love the idea of drafting a guy who shot sub 40% from the field 11th overall. I just don't really see that as a great outcome. So instead, I went with Nick Smith Jr. here, who, yes, he has some of his own efficiency concerns, but part of that was he was playing through an injury, and this is a former top-end recruit, somebody who has really good shooting touch and could perhaps grow into a 3-level scorer. As of right now, I consider him more of a 2-level scorer in that mid-range and the three-point shot. He doesn't get to the rim a lot right now. I think he needs to learn how to put a little bit more pressure on the rim. But the nice thing about Orlando is they already have some of those players who do that in Paulo Banchero. Franz Wagner does a pretty nice job on it as well, of getting to the rim and kind of breaking down a defense. And I think Nick Smith Jr. gives you kind of a different paced player who he's a little silky smooth with the way that he moves, a little bit less physical. He's got some nice length to him that at the position is going to be a pretty nice plus for them. Orlando, like, they need shooting, and I think that Nick Smith Jr. is a shot maker. I don't know if he's just necessarily a three-point shooter. I just didn't feel like reaching with Orlando. And I know Magic fans, everyone knows how much you need shooting. Okay, it's very clear and obvious, and it would go a long way in helping this team. You do also have cap space, so maybe you can go out and sign a shooter or trade for a shooter. Now, it's not the preferred way of going about it. You would love to just be able to draft one here. Like if Grady Dick was available, it would just be a home run selection for them. He isn't available this time. So I think Nick Smith Jr., like, I don't love it, but I don't absolutely hate it either, because I think the upside's there. Someone who potentially before the year, I think people considered him as a possible top 5 pick. I know myself that I looked at him as a possible top 5 pick in my way too early 2023 NBA mock draft, which came out the day after the 2022 NBA draft actually happened. And Nick Smith Jr., I still think there's a lot of like upside with him. I think the floor is pretty low though too, and there's a way that he just ends up not really popping in the NBA. But nonetheless, I think that realistically, Orlando, it's worth a shot here at this spot because of his shot making prowess and the touch that he does possess makes me believe that he could be a pretty good shooter at the NBA level. Pick 12, the Oklahoma City Thunder here now. For me with Oklahoma City, there was a few things I took into consideration with Oklahoma City. Last week we mocked Leonard Miller here, which I do think is a realistic option and a player that kind of fits what Sam Presti would probably be looking for right now. But one thing I do want to mention, in the last 3 NBA drafts, there has been at least one player drafted from the NBL in the first round. You go back those 3 years, you look at a guy in LaMelo Ball playing for Charlotte. Then the next year in 2021, it was Josh Giddey, who was drafted by Oklahoma City. And then in 2022, it was Ousmane Dieng, drafted by Oklahoma City. And we're not going to break that trend here. We're going with Rayan Rupert, who played for the New Zealand Breakers this most recent NBL season. We're drafted him in the first round by Oklahoma City in 2023. It's pretty clear that Oklahoma City not only believes in the development pathway through the NBL, but it's also clear that they send scouts there significant amount of times to the point where they feel very comfortable drafting these guys, not only in the first round, but in the lottery with a lot of trust and commitment to the development process long term. Rayan Rupert is relatively raw yet, but if there is a place in the NBA that makes the most sense for him developing and growing into the player he's meant to be, you could argue Oklahoma City's the spot. Mark Daigneault has done a great job not only overseeing the development of these young guys, but actually putting them in positions on the court to find actual in-game success, showcase their talents, and win basketball games. And that's really the most important part. Rayan Rupert, to me, gives them something that they are lacking right now. And I'm not talking about the rebounding. I'm not necessarily talking about rim protection. I'm talking about a lengthy and taller perimeter on-ball defender. Lou Dort is a fantastic perimeter defender, no question about it, but he's a little shorter. He's not quite as tall and lengthy as Rayan Rupert, which I think would be a nice change of pace for them to throw at some different players around the league. You think about what they already have with Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, who is quite lengthy and he blocks a ton of shots as kind of a chase down defender. He does a very good job of that, averaged over a block a game as a guard, which is incredible. Rayan Rupert possesses some of those same qualities in terms of length and athleticism and defensive capabilities, but really he's going to pick up 94 feet and he's going to test people's handles a lot. And what I mean by that is he's going to be willing to reach. He's going to try and pick your pocket, and he's going to find pretty good success doing that. He does a decent job keeping his chest in front of his matchup's chest, which if you know anything about basketball, you know that's really one of the main ways of trying to shut down another player is maintaining positioning and keeping them away from straight line drives to the rim. Rayan Rupert does a very good job of that. Now, offensively, he's extremely raw. He doesn't really dribble the ball with his left hand right now, which is why when he does, it ends up becoming somewhat of a highlight reel play for him because the other team is not expecting him to do it, so it sets him up well for success. I think there's a long pathway for him to go to becoming a consistent good player, but he does have that relationship with Ousmane Dieng. Both of them are French. They have history playing together, and because of that, I think that he would be an intriguing addition not only to the locker room, but with his current skill set, Oklahoma City, I wouldn't rule them out, considering Rupert as a potential selection at pick 12. Pick 13, the Toronto Raptors on the board again, and it's that time of the video where every single mock I just continue to land with Cason Wallace going to Toronto. It feels almost like a done deal. I know Raptors fans are going to say, well, just when you think, Masai Ujiri is going to do something completely different. I don't know. I've had a good read on Masai Ujiri before. I had a really strong feeling he was going to draft Scotty Barnes the year that he did. And Cason, well, it just feels right. Like Gary Trent Jr., Fred VanVleet, both headed toward free agency. They need a guard. I think people were pleasantly surprised with Cason Wallace's physicals. Decent height for himself. I think people were projecting him to be a little bit smaller than he is. I think he's also got very good length. And defensively, when you actually watch the film, which is the most important part, way more important than actual measurements, he did a great job impacting the game on that end of the floor. No matter what his height is, no matter what his length and wingspan is, he was terrific defensively. And offensively, he does a good job getting to 2 feet, finishing around the rim. He's on balance. And I think when you look at prospects, does Cason Wallace have superstar ceiling? No. But he has a significantly high floor that makes you think he's going to be a starter in this league for quite a while. And that's exactly what Toronto's looking to add into a backcourt that right now is razor thin. Just looking at the likelihood that not only one, but 2 of your starting backcourt guards could be out in free agency. It just makes you wonder what Toronto would likely look to do if they don't draft one here, especially since they owe their 2024 first already to San Antonio. You have to consider drafting one at this spot. And I think the clear and concise answer to me is Cason Wallace. We'll also talk about the Toronto Raptors later on, either this week or next week in a video talking about some potential trades that this team could look to pursue over the offseason. But nonetheless, I'm excited for Toronto and where this team's going for their future. We'll see if they can make the right moves to turn back into a playoff team sooner rather than later. Pick 14, the New Orleans Pelicans here now at this spot. And I landed on Kobe Bufkin once again this week. I really like Kobe Bufkin. He's been a huge riser for me within the last couple of months. The more and more film that I've studied, I keep going back and watching him, and just some of his connector traits that he has just really impressed me. He's smart. He doesn't over dribble, but he's capable of dribbling and getting to spots. He lands and plays off of 2 feet pretty well. He pivots pretty decently. He's not quite Jalen Brunson-esque good at that. I think he's quite a bit worse as a 2-foot player, but he's athletic enough off of 1 foot to still be a threat, whether that's dunking the basketball or blocking shots. As a guard, I think he's got a decent enough frame to be competitive defensively, and I think he's strong. I think he's got good functional strength for the position. Plus, he's just a nice shot maker. I think he's never going to be a 40 to 45% three-point shooter, but he'll constantly hover around 35 to 37% or so. And because of that, it makes you feel really good about him taking open jump shots and knocking him down pretty regularly. I think he can run a show for you and be the guy to start as a point guard. And you might be looking at New Orleans and saying, do they really need that? They just drafted Dyson Daniels last year. I look at Dyson Daniels more of a wing because he just is not as much of an offensive scorer. I think he's better without the ball in his hands and kind of being that like cutter and touch pass. And I think New Orleans is kind of developing and building this interesting team that has a lot of good connectivity and also some high-end stars like a Brandon Ingram, Zion Williamson when he's actually on the court, CJ McCollum to a certain extent, where they're going to be a really dangerous offense no matter what, because they're going to have guys who are smart, guys who know how to play, and then also the skill set around those guys to actually put the ball in the hoop and put up big offensive numbers and gaudy offensive numbers. And because of that, New Orleans is not only a dream fit for Kobe Bufkin, but Kobe Bufkin's a dream selection, in my opinion, for the New Orleans Pelicans at pick 14. Moving on to pick 15, we have the Atlanta Hawks here at this spot. In Atlanta, they're always an interesting team for me to mock. I've looked at Kris Murray a ton of times. I've looked at a few other prospects, and for me, I think Atlanta, they're a wild card because typically when you look at GM draft history, it gives you a good indicator on what this team potentially could look to add, who this GM believes in. And Atlanta, we have a new lead decision maker. Landry Fields, of course, had been an assistant in Atlanta for a long time. He is now the lead decision maker. So who is he going to draft with his first pick in the 2023 NBA draft? And I have Jordan Hawkins here. Landry Fields adds a perimeter shooter. I think one thing that we saw for this team, Travis Schlenk traded away Kevin Huerter, and I think they got decent value for him, getting a first-round pick that had some protection backups on it from the Sacramento Kings. They missed the shooting, though. They missed what Kevin Huerter gave them throughout the regular season, and Jordan Hawkins replaces that as a movement shooter who, off the ball, can bring a lot of life and creativity to an offense. Now, Quinn Snyder didn't really have a lot of that in Utah. You look back to the teams that he coached with the Utah Jazz, there wasn't really a focal point movement shooter on those teams as much. So does that make Jordan Hawkins a clear and obvious fit into what Quinn Snyder looks to do? Maybe not, but one thing about Quinn Snyder is he really did prioritize drive and kick. getting the defense to collapse in and then kicking out to open three-point shooters. Utah consistently shot a lot of threes, even if it wasn't through the movement shooting variety. So Jordan Hawkins, who is a good perimeter shooter, does make some sense, at least in that regard, playing around Trae Young, DeJounte Murray, both guys who I think are capable of fitting into that Quinn Snyder style and building like a good overall team system that's going to work and set up some type of blender, basically, where you're again drawing that defense in and looking for perimeter looks. And I think Jordan Hawkins is going to be able to cash in quite a few of them. Just don't ask him to be the guy driving the basketball or scoring inside the arc, because he's not very good at either of those things as of right now. Pick 16, the Utah Jazz I have going with Kris Murray here at this spot. Utah, remember, earlier on went with Anthony Black, and we're going to add another decently sized prospect to the mix with Kris Murray, of course, the brother of Keegan Murray, who had a really great rookie season. And Keegan Murray, over 65% of his points as a rookie for the Sacramento Kings this year were on three-pointers. And I'm going to tell you right now, Kris Murray is going to even be more reliant on the three-pointer. He's not going to be more prolific, because Keegan Murray set a record in terms of three-pointers made as a rookie. But I'm telling you, Kris Murray can really shoot the rock. He's got a left-handed stroke. He's really differentiable from his twin brother because of that. But outside of that left-handed stroke, they play very similarly. They're going to both knock down perimeter shots. I think Kris Murray's a little less skilled when it comes to off-the-dribble shot making as of right now, although he did flash that quite a bit in his junior season for the Iowa Hawkeyes. And I think that realistically, Utah, they don't need more physical size. I think that Grant Williams is a realistic option for Utah to add in free agency this offseason. But if you're not 100% sure in your ability to actually land Grant Williams this offseason, and who's a restricted free agent, Kris Murray makes a lot of sense here, 16th overall, because not only are you adding in just a good player, you're adding out in a player who can stretch the floor around Walker Kessler, around Lauri Markkanen, around Anthony Black, who I think is going to be a really good drive and kick player in his own right. For Will Hardy's offense, this gives you another guy who can knock down perimeter shots. We know Malik Beasley found a pretty good role for himself there in Utah, and then ultimately they traded him, so they kind of have a need again for another shooter. Now, Kris Murray is very different from Malik Beasley. You're not going to run him off of staggers as much, although I think he could be capable of it. You're probably just going to do that to a little bit of a lesser extent, but I do think open opportunities, he's going to cash that in fairly regularly, and I think he's going to be a good component to winning basketball there in Utah. Pick 17, the Los Angeles Lakers, and I think one thing was really clear about the Lakers when we watched the Western Conference Finals and their ultimate sweep after getting swept by the Denver Nuggets. There's a few things that were pretty clear. First of all, the guard position is not at all solved. Okay, Dennis Schroeder was a little up and down. I think for the most part, though, he had a nice season. Dennis Schroeder was very good for the Lakers this year. D'Angelo Russell, though, I said it that I don't trust him as far as I can throw him. He let the Lakers down big time. Now, do they win the series if he plays his normal level? Probably not anyway. You just can't really go into the conference finals and expect D'Angelo Russell to be that good of a player for you. He's heading toward free agency. Do they go out and consider a guy like Keyonte George at this spot? I 100% think they do. Keyonte George, a lot of people view him as a lottery talent in this draft. I understand the reasons why, especially if you watch highlights specifically. Some of his highlights are unreal. The perimeter shot making is unbelievable when it goes in. But sometimes the decision making is really poor when it doesn't go in. He shot under 40% from the field. The touch is there. It just comes down to whether or not he's going to have it night in, night out, because he's a little bit of a hot or cold player. If he's hot, he's really hot. If he's cold, he's really cold. The Lakers kind of already have that to a certain extent, but adding another one of those in isn't bad, because it gives Darvin Ham at least another guy that he could go to and say, hey, if he's hot, we'll ride him tonight. And then if he's cold one night, hey, we'll go to a different player or a different set at this point. I do also want to address real quick, there are rumors around LeBron James potentially retiring. That will not happen. I do not believe LeBron James will retire, especially when he is 1 year away from Bronny James potentially entering the league. Worst case scenario, LeBron would probably step away from his current contract right now, take a small break from the NBA, and then come back once Bronny's in the league. Or it's possible that he just misses the start of next season to kind of get his feet right and rest up and heal up his body back to where it needs to be to actually play, because I do think that we just throughout the playoffs didn't really see the same LeBron James. A lot of people designated it because of age. I think it's more so because of the feet injury, because he looked different than he did in December, and it's not like he aged that much since December. So I think that realistically, the Lakers, they're in a weird spot right now. I think there's a lot of questions about this team long term. But I do not think LeBron James is at least retiring for good. I think at worst case, he takes 1 year away from the league until Bronny James is back on a roster at some point, being a first-round pick in 2024. Pick 18, the Miami Heat here now at this spot. And for Miami, wow, what a run. They are 1 win away from the NBA Finals at the time I'm recording this. That Game 3 blowout over Boston was just unbelievable. So if you're a Miami Heat fan, first of all, I want to hear you guys in the chat. I want to hear how hyped up you guys are. And I just want to understand how excited Miami fans are for the basketball that they're seeing right now. Jimmy Butler's on another level. Bam Adebayo. Game 3, he had some marvelous, unbelievable plays. I think about that spin jam that he had. That was just unbelievable, incredible. Caleb Martin's playing out of his mind. Duncan Robinson's having a great postseason for himself again. I'm very happy to see it. And Gabe Vincent's playing very well as well, by the way. But I want to add in some more guard talent, just with the fact that Max Strus, Gabe Vincent, both headed toward free agency this offseason. Kyle Lowry will be heading into the last year of his deal. It's always better to draft guards before you need them, because then it gives them some time to develop, and it lets them just kind of settle in. Very likely we would see Jalen Hood-Schifino playing for the Skyforce at some point as a rookie, and that's not anything crazy to say. Now, I think he's a little bit more of an NBA-ready guard than some of the other players we've already seen go off the board, because he's got prototypical size. He can run a pick and roll. He plays with good pace. He's able to slow his body down and actually read the court. And because of that, Miami is getting a player who I think would be a really nice pairing with Bam Adebayo in the pick and roll. I think that he could do a lot of nice things for this team, kind of running the show for them throughout the regular season, which has been somewhat of an issue for Miami over the last couple of years. Obviously, postseason time, it doesn't matter because this team turns up like crazy. And I shouldn't even say the last couple of years. A year and a half ago, they were the 1 seed. So I'm not trying to rag on Miami, obviously. Miami's been a good team for the last 2 years, realistically. And this year, their regular season attention to detail just maybe wasn't there. But Jalen Hood-Schifino, I think, a really nice addition. Miami, it's crazy. They're probably going to be in the NBA Finals, and they have the 18th overall pick in the draft. Just kind of shows how crazy their run is. Typically, we don't see a team representing the East in the NBA Finals picking 18th overall. But that's what we see right now this year, and it's a really good opportunity for them to add some talent who also fits a need on their roster while still being a really good competitive team. Pick 19, the Golden State Warriors. Now, there's been a player who I've really loved to mock to this team, but I decided to kind of pull away from that a little bit because I do think it's possible that they just look a different direction, because sometimes teams don't see all the same things that I see. And it's difficult because, to me, Trayce Jackson-Davis is like the no-brainer obvious fit for Golden State. But just because I feel like something's a perfect fit doesn't mean that's actually what happens on draft night, which is the point of these mock drafts. So here I actually went with Jett Howard, who is a talented wing out of Michigan. And I think with some of the rumors around Jonathan Kuminga, some of the question marks about Jordan Poole's future with the organization, Draymond Green's headed toward free agency, they're looking for a little bit of everything, a little bit of wing talent who can also play make and move the ball and maybe handle the rock for you a little bit. I think Jett Howard does a lot of those things. Oh, and by the way, he shot above 39% from 3 on catch and shoot opportunity. So playing off of Steph Curry, playing off some of that high pick and roll that Golden State's starting to opt into more and more and more as the team and the core ages. I think Jett Howard could find himself as a good spot-up shooter for this team while still also being able to do more when he's asked to do it. And working off of dribble handoffs was really his big MO in Michigan. A lot of Zoom series sets, getting him to his left hand, or getting him to his right hand, excuse me. And I think that realistically, Jett Howard could be a really nice addition for Golden State because of some of his playmaking capabilities, some of his ability to impact the game in a variety of ways offensively. And I think Golden State, we saw it this postseason, they just needed a little bit more talent. They need a little bit more wing depth, and I think Jett Howard definitely addresses that for them here. Pick 20, the Houston Rockets now at this spot. This pick comes from the Los Angeles Clippers. They, of course, made the Eric Gordon trade with them at the deadline this year, moving what was ultimately pick 30 up to pick 20. A very good move for Houston, by the way, being able to jump 10 spots by getting off of Eric Gordon in the draft. I mean, it's a really good move for them and sets them up pretty well here to add an impact player. And that impact player for me is Dereck Lively. One big thing that I know about Ime Udoka, he likes size, he likes rim protection, and he likes guys who can block shots around the rim and impact the game that way. We saw it with Robert Williams. And that's one of the big differences between Ime Udoka and Joe Mazzulla in Boston this year. Mazzulla opting with more of a perimeter approach and perimeter attack with playing a little bit more Derrick White and a little bit more small ball, whereas Ime was really famous for the two big men, Al Horford plus Robert Williams combination. So maybe, just maybe, we see Dereck Lively in the starting lineup sooner than later. And I think that Houston already has kind of some underrated pieces that could impact the game in that way. I think Jabari Smith, Tari Eason, both athletic guys, both lengthy guys who I think can block shots. I think that Ime Udoka has some decent pieces already on the roster that fit. Alperen Sengun is really the big question mark, because is that something that Ime Udoka is going to be willing to work with? Of course, Sengun, you could argue right now, maybe the most talented player on the current roster as we currently speak. You know, some people will raise their hand for Kevin Porter Jr. or Jalen Green. I think there's an argument to be had there, but I do have questions about if Sengun is the defensive center that Ime Udoka would want to go with. And we also have questions right now just with how the Denver Nuggets advanced to the finals. Do you need a defensive-minded center to make deep postseason runs? And the answer to that might be no. But I think Houston would definitely love the possibility of adding one here. Raphael Stone has already indicated that they will look into athletic centers and guys who can protect the rim and give them different kind of play styles than what Alperen Sengun offers. And I think Ime Udoka also alluded to that as well in his introductory press conference with the Houston Rockets. So Dereck Lively, if he's available on the board, this is almost the floor I see for him. 20th overall, Houston feels really good about drafting him at this spot. 21, the Brooklyn Nets. This pick comes from the Phoenix Suns in that Kevin Durant blockbuster trade. And here I have the Nets replenishing some talent and adding in a really nice shot maker in Dariq Whitehead, somebody who before the year started was a likely top 5 pick just after winning National Player of the Year at the high school level. This guy was a lights out shooter, not only at the 3-point line in high school, but he was also just a deadly mid-range shooter who knew how to curl off of stagger screens and find his way into a 15-foot pull-up jump shot, and he would bury it consistently. This year at Duke, it was a little bit more of a struggle. Never found a clear role. He's been going through some feet and ankle issues that have caused him to miss a significant amount of time. He missed the beginning of the year. He's also now missed the combine because of this too. So there is some questions about where his draft stock is headed. Is it possible that he falls down boards? Very likely, but I'm telling you, the talent is there. A lot of the questions that were around AJ Griffin in last year's draft caused him to fall out of the lottery, and I told everyone then that it was a mistake, and I feel like Atlanta feels really good about what they drafted last year, 16th overall in AJ Griffin. And now for me, Dariq Whitehead at 21, this feels like another huge home run for Brooklyn, because even with all the ups and downs and never finding a clear and defined role last year for Duke, he still shot over 40% from 3. He is still a torch from behind the 3-point line, and everyone knows that, everyone acknowledges that every team in the league needs shooting. And Brooklyn's got a pretty decent amount of it right now, but I think you really have to look at this roster outside of Mikal Bridges as a massive question mark. I think really the two players that are safe are him and Nick Claxton, but I wouldn't even consider Nick Claxton 100% safe based on what Jacques Vaughn's comments have been about the team. And I think Dariq Whitehead, if you're looking for talent and long-term upside, he's really the guy that makes the most sense at this spot, as a guy who I think is going to have a surefire role in the league, but also could maybe develop into a lot more if he gets back into form of what he was playing for Montverde Academy in high school. Pick 22, we're staying on the topic of the Brooklyn Nets, and with this selection, I have them going with Leonard Miller. Like I talked about with Jacques Vaughn and consistent complaints about rebounding and some of the issues with the Nets front court this year, just not being able to secure possessions, grab second chance opportunities, and limit the other team from grabbing second chance opportunities. We're going with one of the better rebounders in the class, and it's really a night and day difference from where Leonard Miller was a year ago. I feel like I talk about this a decent amount, but I just need to continue to harp on it. It's an incredible turnaround from where I had felt Leonard Miller was a year ago to where he is now. There's a really strong argument to be had that he is the biggest riser from last year to this year in terms of draft positioning and expectations on him coming into this season, because last year he kind of played a point forward role and came into G League Ignite. I wasn't exactly sure what role he was going to play in, and he kind of bought into this off-ball role of, hey, he's going to go and crash the boards really hard. He's going to finish around the rim when he catches the ball on rolls. And by the way, he still has some playmaking feel when he's in positions to do so. He's still a little loosey-goosey with the ball. He's going to turn the ball over kind of an astounding rate for a power forward, which is part of the reason why you see him in the 20s here instead of in the teens or higher. But Leonard Miller is still a player who I think is going to generate a lot of intrigue. Like I said earlier, he was in the lottery last mock draft with the Oklahoma City Thunder. I think OKC could be a team that shakes some things up, and Leonard Miller would be on their radar. But nonetheless, he's got a wide range right now. It's going to really come down to if a specific team loves him or not. And I think Brooklyn could be a team that does land on him in this draft process. Pick 23, the Portland Trailblazers here now. This pick comes from the New York Knicks. From that Josh Hart trade, and with the Blazers, remember earlier on we went with Brandon Miller and talked about the leverage situation around Damian Lillard. At this spot, I like Brice Sensabaugh for them, and we're going with a little bit more offense, a little bit more physicality as well into that backcourt. He's got a decent frame to him, and he's really strong for a guard already coming into his first year as a professional. I think he's going to even put on a little bit more muscle mass, get a little bit stronger, get in a little bit better shape in terms of the quickness, and I think that's going to be good for him. Right now, you can maybe even argue he's a little bit too heavy because he's a little bit more reliant on bumping guys and getting to a spot that way than just naturally blowing by them, which is partially why, for me, he falls down to 23, but he's got a really good triple threat game. He knows how to get to spots on the court, and he's a spot scorer. What I mean by that is not that he's going to score in timely spots, but he's going to score at specific spots on the floor, specifically the left elbow, the right short corner. He likes those spots a lot, and once he gets to them, he just rises up and knows, hey, I've repped this out enough that I'm going to make this shot pretty much every single time if it's open. And he's a really good player. Portland, I just think that they have to keep their perspective on the long-term team building aspect of this roster, because I like what they've done so far. I like the Shane Sharp pick. I like the Jabari Walker pick. I still think this team badly needs some rim protection. I'm kind of bummed that we didn't really address it that well. Brandon Miller does block some shots in transition, but he's not like a consistent night in, night out shot blocker. Brice Sensabaugh obviously is not either as a guard. So this is, not necessarily an A-plus draft for Portland, but this is some talent that they've added in, and there's some potential pathways for them to continue to add talent after this day as well, moving forward in the future. Pick 24, the Sacramento Kings here. Kings, what a season that they had. And, that Game 7 against Golden State, I'm sure that still kind of lingers in the back of Kings fans' minds, obviously, a little bit, just because, you saw how the Warriors and Kings series went, or the Warriors and Kings series, how that went, and then how the Warriors ultimately played against the Lakers, and would the Kings have had a matchup advantage there potentially? What would that series have looked like? Those are a lot of big what ifs. What we do know now is the Kings at 24, there's some really good players out here for them, and I kind of love an upside swing for them. GG Jackson, a player who a lot of people see as a potential top 10 guy. Some people like myself see him significantly lower than that. If you compare his statistics as a freshman, yes, a reclassified freshman who should technically be a high school senior right now, to someone like Emoni Bates, who was also a reclassified freshman, you compare their freshman year numbers, they are eerily similar. For some reason, people look at GG Jackson still as a top 10 guy, whereas people look at Emoni Bates as an absolutely brutal prospect. I think it should be the other way around. Not that Emoni Bates should be a top 10 guy, but I think Emoni Bates has a more clear role in the NBA, which is good open shot shooter. I don't know if GG Jackson's going to be that, because the three-point shot is very inconsistent right now. I'm not really sure if he's going to be able to develop in that regard. But there is the athleticism, and that's part of the reason why people maybe prioritize him a little bit over Emoni Bates. He's stronger. He's got a better muscular build to him. He's definitely a lot heavier than Emoni Bates, and I mean that in a good way for GG Jackson. He's also somebody who is more vertically explosive, more vertically athletic than Emoni Bates. So that's part of the reason why some people still do prefer GG Jackson over him. Now, I think the shooting is a problem. I think Sacramento could use a little bit more shooting, especially out of the corner. They do a lot of nice stuff already to kind of scheme their actual good shooters open and scheme their non-shooters as cutters. Mike Brown did a great job in year one. I was very, very surprised with the job that he did. Actually, I was not expecting great results, and that's exactly what Sacramento found, was great results. So a lot of kudos to him. He had a perfect first year in Sacramento. Now it's about building off of that. And GG Jackson, if he can oversee the development here, maybe he turns into a home run pick to put around Sabonis and Fox long term as an athletic freak who can cut and maybe at some point become another ball handler, another shot maker for you down the road. Pick 25, we're looking at the Memphis Grizzlies now at this spot. And Memphis, I've continued to like to keep it simple here. Brandon Podziemski is a guy I really like for them. Another flamethrower from behind the three-point line. We've talked about a few guys who can catch fire behind the arc: Grady Dick, Jordan Hawkins, Brandon Podziemski. I think there's a good argument that Brandon Podziemski should maybe be considered over Jordan Hawkins in a lot of ways. I know some people are going to roll their eyes at that, but I think it's the reality, to be honest, because Brandon Podziemski, he was WCC Player of the Year in his sophomore season. His freshman year, he spent at Illinois, didn't really play at all, which was a big mistake by Illinois, honestly, because they could have used his shooting last year around some of the pieces that they had a season ago. And I think now, with the way he played at Santa Clara, he had a heck of a year. He rebounds the basketball. I think, people were kind of surprised by his athleticism, his vertical jump. There's some rumors going around that maybe he cheated by not putting his arm fully up for the original standing reach test, which of course would adjust his vertical numbers. Nonetheless, the guy rebounds the ball. He averaged 9 rebounds a game in college as a 6'4" guard. So he, I think, is fairly athletic vertically. I think people are going to underestimate him as an athlete. And I think he's a really nice get for a team in Memphis that needs more offensive firepower around Ja Morant. One thing we did see was the importance of Luke Kennard for this team and how his spacing, his shot making from behind the arc opened up the court for their best players. I think Brandon Podziemski can have a similar impact for them and give them another deep range shot maker that they could badly use. 26, we have the Indiana Pacers here now. This is their second pick of the first round. Of course, remember earlier on we went with Jarace Walker, and we're going to double down on that with Bobby Klintman here of Wake Forest. Welcome to the first round mock here on the channel, Bobby. And it's crazy, the turn of events here. I just did not really think Bobby Klintman was going to be a first round level pick, and I still don't even really know if I believe it, but he did not participate in the NBA draft combine, actually withdrew from it. And the reason why that matters is a lot of people speculate, including myself, I'm in the camp that believes this, that he could potentially have a first round promise on the table for himself. Now, you might say, how do you kind of land on that? A team is basically saying, look, we're going to draft you. Please don't go to the combine. Please don't showcase yourself to other teams because we're worried that another team might like you more, trade up to get ahead of us, or just draft you outright before you're actually available for our pick. And for Bobby Klintman, you might say, well, why does that even make sense? Because maybe he would just get drafted higher. If he has a bad combine, maybe he hurts his stock a little bit and falls out of that first round. There's some speculation here that he could be a first round draft prospect now at this point. And it's pretty shocking because he averaged 5 points a game this year for the Deacons. And I think that there's some questions about the production and just who he is as a player. But the one thing I do have to say about Bobby Klintman is when you actually do turn on the film, there is some intriguing aspects to his game. He's a pretty good 2-foot jumper. He can jump in traffic pretty well, which I think is an underrated element. He's fairly athletic, 6'10". He can shoot the ball a little bit. Now his mechanics are a little spotty and irregular, so I'm not sure if he's going to be able day one to be a consistent minutes type of player. But there is some upside there, and he's also somebody who actually is somewhat of a flashy passer too. Especially if you watch highlights, you're gonna have a lot of fun watching this kid. Full games are definitely more indicative of who guys actually are, but for you guys, the whole point of watching, I'm sure, is because you don't necessarily have the time to watch every single prospect the way that I go out there and grind for you guys to do. So I would recommend watching Bobby Klintman a little bit. I think it would be a lot of fun for you to see exactly who he is as a player and what he's capable of. Because I think Indiana's getting an intriguing player here. The reason I landed on Indiana, not only do they need wings and forwards, which is partially why it would make sense that maybe this is the team that told them, hey, look, we'd like to take you in the first round, but they do also have 3 first-round picks. So them and Utah were 2 teams I considered here, mostly for Bobby Klintman, because they're the safest ones to project since they have the most volume of selections that they would strongly consider it. Now, at the same time, if I was Bobby Klintman's agent, I'd be like, well, sometimes teams expect this guy to be off the board. They promise you one thing, they maybe do another. So is it possible Klintman still goes in round 2? Yes. I think that's a realistic possibility. I know last year that happened as well. And a guy in Orlando, Caleb Houston, didn't participate as much in the combine, and he ended up going in the second round to Orlando. It happens. So it's not like Bobby Klintman's a lock to be in the first round, but I do think that it's a realistic possibility now at this point. 27, the Charlotte Hornets on the clock here. This pick comes from the Denver Nuggets, and with this selection I have them looking at Noah Clowney, and this is an interesting grab because last year they did draft Mark Williams. They don't necessarily need a center, but remember we did go earlier on with Scoot Henderson. The reason I'm going with Noah Clowney here, I think they would like to add a little bit more size and some perimeter shooting. And Noah Clowney just feels like flat out a good basketball player, someone who can knock down the three-point shot. He plays a pro-style game as a center, and that's something that I do think would draw Charlotte in as a potential landing spot. I think Hornets fans would prefer to see a wing drafted here. To me, Miles Bridges is going to be back on the roster, so I think that is going to address some of those concerns in terms of, hey, who's the starting small forward or, you know, starting power forward, that kind of thing. I think that that's going to be answered through free agency, albeit not an external free agent, more of an internal free agent, guy that didn't play last year for them for obvious reasons. I expect him to be back in the fold, which is why here you can kind of go more off of talent instead of need, and that's why I think you do end up drafting a guy here in Noah Clowney. That does make some sense. Pick 28, the Utah Jazz back on the board. This is one of those picks where I did consider Bobby Klintman for a little while before ultimately landing on him at pick 26 to the Indiana Pacers. And 28th overall here, the Utah Jazz, I have looking at Dillon Mitchell. And this is probably a surprise here as well for Utah, because we've already looked at some interesting players for the Jazz. We, of course, landed on Anthony Black at 9, and we landed with Kris Murray at 16. So you might be saying, why Dillon Mitchell? And I think Dillon Mitchell is actually such a perfect addition for Utah, because they found a lot of success early in the season playing Jared Vanderbilt next to both Walker Kessler and Lauri Markkanen, and kind of, you know, using both of them, and or, you know, 2 of the 3, or sometimes 3 of the 3, or even sometimes 1 of the 3 guys on the court at all times. It was, I think, a fun thing to watch. They oversaw Jared Vanderbilt being willing to take more corner 3-pointers, and Dillon Mitchell flashed that at the combine as a guy who, hey, his shot is a little bit revamped. He knocked down some perimeter jump shots, and albeit maybe not the best volume, maybe not the best efficiency at the combine when he was displaying some of those improving skills that he has, I still think it did catch scouts and executives' attention, because his entire time at Texas, he did not shoot a single 3-point shot. He's mostly known as a finisher right now, somebody who's going to catch lobs around the rim or you know, finish in advantage situations, and that's really what he's best at right now. I think there's a very clear defined role for Dillon Mitchell. He's going to be a fantastic baseline operator. I think that he's going to blossom into a good defender as well in the NBA, and I think realistically, if people focus too much on what he's done and not what he's capable of doing, you're going to miss out on something pretty good here. And a lot of people like to draft off of production. Then tell me why Zach Edey isn't a first-round pick, okay? Dillon Mitchell, I know the production's not there. I understand that. This is somebody that I've been very vocal about the entire year. I feel like as the draft combine came and went, I was more vindicated in that than I wasn't. And I think that he's a player that should garner first-round consideration. Look back to last year. Peyton Watson was a first-round selection after having one of the worst freshman seasons in recent memory for a top recruit, and he ended up in the first round. Dillon Mitchell had a decent freshman season. I wouldn't say great, I wouldn't say impressive, but a decent one. And I think that there's a lot in the tank for him as an impact player on winning basketball, even if that doesn't mean shooting a ton of 3-pointers, if that doesn't mean being a 20-point per game scorer, which he'll never be. He can be a nice player, he can be an impact player, and do some good things for a roster, no doubt. Pick 29, back to the Indiana Pacers now. Pacers fans, I do have a trade video up on the channel as well. I'll try and put a card for that here during this segment of the video, so make sure you click on that one after this mock draft to see what the Pacers could potentially do on draft night in terms of trading some picks, because they do have 3 first-round picks and 2 second-round picks 32 and 55 as well. But at 29, this is going to be a fan favorite. I have Trayce Jackson-Davis going here. And Indiana, they already have some intriguing bigs on their roster. Of course, you think about Jalen Smith and Isaiah Jackson. You might say they don't necessarily need a center here at this spot. And I would say that's a pretty good argument to be had. But I'm not going to rule out a potential trade of Isaiah Jackson. I think Jalen Smith, yes, Indiana likes him. But would they potentially view Trayce Jackson-Davis as better? I think the answer to that is yes. And I think very local, obviously, playing for the Hoosiers. The Pacers have had eyes on him, not just for 1 year, but for multiple years. They are very well aware of who this kid is. They have all the glowing reports on him. They know how hard of a worker he is. And better than anyone, they know how good of a player he is. He's been a fantastic player in the Big Ten for Indiana for a long time. He blocks a lot of shots. He can play out of the post a bit, although in the NBA, I don't think he's going to do that very much other than being a passer out of the post, which I think would be an intriguing thing for Rick Carlisle to add to his offense. We haven't seen a ton of that since Dirk Nowitzki retired. For Dallas, he didn't really play out of the post very often outside of his little bit of time doing that with Kristaps Porzingis, which found varied success, sometimes successful, sometimes not. I think Trayce Jackson-Davis could give you a different type of offense, run some post splits, run some high splits. You can do some really intriguing things with him as a passer. Oh, and by the way, he's just a good athlete who can be a good rim and roll guy for you. He can, be a rim protector. We've talked about his blocks a significant amount on the channel already. I think he's a player who gets some absolutely incredible blocks, whether that's on reverse layups or just rotations that you just don't expect him to be the weak side guy to get over there, and he does. He's got good anticipation. I think the Pacers nail this pick selecting Trayce Jackson-Davis here. I almost said Hood-Schifino. I feel like I do this every mock now. But Zach, if you're watching, I know you're going to be hyped about this pick, so big shout out to you as well. Zach's a big-time Indiana fan, and he actually, I believe, goes to the University of Indiana as well, so he's probably a big Trayce Jackson-Davis guy himself. Pick 30, the Los Angeles Clippers here now. This pick, of course, again, from that swap with Houston via Milwaukee. So the Clippers, last pick of the first round, what could they look to do? I considered Amari Bailey here. I considered a wide variety of players. I think Amari Bailey is a really intriguing pick, but I decided to go a different way, and I went with Andre Jackson Jr. out of UConn, who the shot making is just not there right now. He's not a good perimeter shooter, but that has not scared the Clippers away in the past. You look at some of their other selections, when they took a guy like Terrence Mann, I think is a really good example, who has a good physical frame, impacted winning in his time in college, and they felt like there was a lot of tools there that they could use to win basketball games and develop. He was a second-round pick. Andre Jackson Jr. here, I think, is going to grow into being a first-round pick. We have not seen him very often in my first-round mocks. The further and further we get into this process, the more buzz I'm personally hearing about him, the more I think that there's going to be legitimate interest in the back end of the first round around him. I wouldn't be completely shocked if a team really high, maybe, even before pick 20, fell in love with him and decided that they were going to select him with their selection. I don't think that's absolutely outrageous to believe is a possibility right now, but I just couldn't really find that clear spot in this mock, so I landed with him going pick 30. I do think he's a likely first-round pick now at this spot, and he had a really fantastic end of his season for UConn. He was a big part on why that team won the national title. And just like Terrence Mann, if the shooting comes around, this is a massive home run for the Clippers. And even if it doesn't, I still think he's going to be impactful. He's going to be able to defend across multiple positions. He slashes, he connects the offense by being a cutter and making timely plays when he has to. And I think the Clippers need a little bit more of that as well. This is an important pick for the Clippers to continue building their roster long term, and I hope they get it right. Andre Jackson Jr. would be a great selection for them. Thank you all so much for watching. I really do hope you enjoyed this video. Just a reminder, we do have a brand new Discord as well. Just a week old at the time you're watching this. Very excited about that Discord. Link is in the description for that, as well as links to our Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. I would recommend going and following us on all of those platforms just so you don't miss out on any utility sports content. I really do hope you enjoyed. I put a lot of work into this. I'm actually just getting done recording this at about 2 in the morning my time, so I've been absolutely grinding for you guys. The 4th video I've recorded today, so I do hope you've enjoyed. I've had a lot of fun recording. I've had a lot of fun talking about these draft prospects like I always do. Thanks again so much for watching. If you did enjoy, leave a like, subscribe to the channel for more, and we'll catch you in the very next utility sports video.